The champagne was still bubbling in my glass when my boss walked into my office with a termination letter. I had just closed the biggest deal in our company's history, a $1.8 billion contract that would transform everything. But instead of celebrating, I was about to discover that success sometimes comes with a price tag nobody warns you about. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning of March 15th started like any other Tuesday, except for the butterflies doing gymnastics in my stomach. I'd been working on the Henderson Group acquisition for 18 months, and today was the day we'd finally sign the papers. At 32, I was the youngest vice president at Meridian Capital, and this deal would either make my career or break it. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting my navy blazer for the third time. Sarah Martinez had worked too hard to get here to let nerves sabotage everything now. Growing up in a small apartment in Queens with my single mother, watching her work 2 jobs just to keep us afloat, I'd promised myself I'd never be financially vulnerable again. This deal was supposed to be my ticket to true security. The Meridian Capital offices on the 47th floor of the Chrysler Building buzzed with unusual energy that morning. Word had leaked that something big was happening, though only a handful of people knew the details. I grabbed my coffee, black, no sugar, because I'd trained myself to like it that way during those brutal all-nighters in business school, and headed to the conference room. "Sarah, ready for the big day?" Jennifer Walsh, our CFO, smiled as she passed me in the hallway. Jennifer had been my mentor since I'd started at Meridian 5 years ago as a junior analyst. She was the one who'd seen potential in me when others just saw another ambitious 20-something with more drive than experience. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. The Henderson Group had been a white whale for companies like ours for years. They owned everything from luxury hotels to manufacturing plants across the Midwest, but they'd remained stubbornly independent. When rumors started circulating that old Marcus Henderson was finally ready to sell, every major investment firm on Wall Street started circling. I'd gotten the lead on this deal through a combination of luck and relentless preparation. My college roommate, Lisa Chen, worked in Henderson's accounting department, and she'd mentioned during one of our monthly catch-up calls that there was unusual activity around the executive offices. Most people would have filed that information away and forgotten about it. I spent the next week researching everything I could find about Henderson Group's financial structure. What I discovered was fascinating. The company was incredibly profitable but cash poor. They'd been reinvesting everything back into acquisitions and expansion, which looked great on paper but left them vulnerable if they needed liquid capital quickly. When I presented my analysis to the partners at Meridian, they were skeptical. Marcus Henderson had a reputation for being impossible to work with, and more than one firm had wasted millions in legal fees trying to court him. But I had an angle nobody else had considered. Henderson Group's biggest weakness wasn't financial. It was succession planning. Marcus was 78 years old, and his only son had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. His daughter lived in Europe and had no interest in the business. The company that had been his life's work was going to die with him unless he found a way to preserve his legacy. I spent 6 weeks crafting the perfect approach. Instead of focusing on the financial benefits of a sale, I researched Marcus Henderson's philanthropic interests. He'd quietly donated millions to veterans organizations over the years, something that barely registered in the business press but meant everything to him. My proposal wasn't just about acquiring his company, it was about creating the Henderson Foundation for Veterans Services, funded by a portion of the sale proceeds and managed in perpetuity. The first meeting was scheduled for 30 minutes. We talked for 3 hours. Marcus Henderson was nothing like I'd expected. The business magazines portrayed him as a ruthless corporate raider, but in person, he was more like a grandfather who happened to run a billion-dollar empire. He had framed Photos of every employee who'd served in the military scattered across his office. And he knew personal details about people who worked in his factories across 6 states. "You know, Miss Martinez, I've had a lot of smooth-talking Wall Street types sit in that chair over the years," he said, gesturing to where I sat across from his massive oak desk. "Most of them see dollar signs when they look at what I've built. You're the first one who seems to understand what it actually means." That was the beginning of 18 months of the most intense negotiation of my career. Henderson didn't just want to sell his company, he wanted to make sure it would be treated right. Every aspect of the deal had to be perfect. Employee protection. Clauses, environmental standards, community investment commitments. The legal paperwork alone filled 14 binders. There were moments when I thought the whole thing would collapse. Henderson's lawyers were notoriously difficult, and our own legal team started grumbling about the complexity of the structure we were creating. But every time we hit a roadblock, I'd remember why this mattered. This wasn't just a transaction. It was about preserving something meaningful. The breakthrough came during a late-night session in Henderson's office in Detroit. We'd been arguing for hours about employee pension obligations, and everyone was exhausted. Henderson suddenly stood up and walked to the window overlooking the factory floor. "You see those lights down there?" he asked. "Third shift just started. Most of those people have been with me for over 20 years. Some of them, their parents worked for me too. When I shake hands on this deal, I'm not just selling assets and inventory. I'm placing those people's futures in your hands." I joined him at the window, looking down at the workers moving between the production lines. "Mr. Henderson, I give you my word that we'll honor every commitment in this agreement. These people won't just keep their jobs, they'll have better opportunities than they've ever had." He studied my face for a long moment, then extended his hand. "All right, Miss Martinez, let's make this happen." The final negotiations were a masterclass in high-stakes deal-making. Henderson Group's investment bankers, led by the legendary Thomas Kirkpatrick from Goldman Sachs, pushed back on every detail. They wanted the highest possible price, obviously, but they also wanted to make sure we weren't promising more than we could deliver. Kirkpatrick had a reputation for making grown executives cry during due diligence, but I'd done my homework. I knew our numbers inside and out. "Your integration timeline is aggressive," Kirkpatrick said during one particularly tense session. "Most acquisitions of this size take 3 years to show meaningful synergies. You're projecting significant savings in year 1. "That's because most acquisitions try to force a one-size-fits-all approach," I replied. "We're keeping Henderson's operational structure intact while optimizing their capital allocation through our existing relationships. The savings come from efficiency, not layoffs." The room fell silent. Even Henderson's team looked impressed. That was the moment I knew we had them. By February, we were down to final terms. The deal was structured as a $1.8 billion cash and stock transaction, with Henderson Group maintaining operational independence as a wholly owned subsidiary of Meridian Capital. Marcus would stay on as chairman emeritus, and we'd establish the Henderson Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million. But the real complexity was in the details that nobody outside the negotiating room would ever see. We'd crafted protection clauses for every category of employee, environmental standards that exceeded federal requirements, and community investment commitments that would pump millions back into the local economies where Henderson operated. It was the kind of deal that business schools would study for decades. The signing was scheduled for March 15th at Henderson's headquarters in Detroit. I flew out the night before, staying at a hotel downtown because I wanted to be close to the action. I barely slept, running through every possible last-minute complication in my mind. When I arrived at Henderson Group's offices that morning, the atmosphere was electric. This wasn't just a business transaction, it was a historic moment. Local news crews had gathered outside, and I could see Henderson employees watching from windows throughout the building. The ceremony itself was surprisingly simple. After all, those months of complex negotiations, It came down to signatures on a stack of documents. Marcus Henderson signed first, his weathered hand steady despite his age. Then it was my turn, representing Meridian Capital as the lead negotiator on the deal. "Congratulations, Miss Martinez," Henderson said as we shook hands for the cameras. "You've done something special here." I felt a surge of pride unlike anything I'd experienced before. This wasn't just about the money or the career advancement. We'd created something that would benefit thousands of people for generations. The Henderson Foundation would fund job training programs for veterans. The employee protection clauses would preserve hundreds of jobs, and the environmental standards would set a new precedent for responsible corporate acquisition. The flight back to New York was a blur of phone calls and congratulations. Jennifer Walsh called from the office to say that the partners were thrilled. My mother called from Queens, crying because she'd seen the news coverage. Even my ex-boyfriend texted to say he was proud of me, which was simultaneously touching and annoying. I spent the flight thinking about what came next. This deal would establish me as one of the top deal makers in the industry. I was already getting calls from headhunters at other firms, offering packages that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago, but Meridian had been good to me and I wasn't ready to leave just yet. When I walked into the Meridian offices that afternoon, the entire floor erupted in applause. Someone had hung a banner that read, "Congratulations, Sarah." And there was a cake in the break room with 1.8B written in frosting. It felt like a movie moment, the kind of career high that you remember forever. Richard Blackwood, the managing partner, pulled me aside after the impromptu celebration died down. "Sarah, I want you to know how proud we are of what you've accomplished. This deal is going to transform Meridian's position in the market." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I couldn't have done it without the support of the entire team." "We need to talk about your future here," he continued. "Why don't you come to my office tomorrow morning? We have some things to discuss." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. I assumed he was talking about a promotion, maybe a bigger office, certainly a substantial bonus. The Henderson deal had exceeded everyone's expectations, and I'd delivered results that would generate fees for Meridian for years to come. That night, I celebrated with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a week. I called my mother again just to hear her voice. She'd worked so hard to give me opportunities she'd never had, and moments like this made all those sacrifices feel worthwhile. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, as always. I wanted to clean up some loose ends from the Henderson deal before my meeting with Blackwood. There were integration timelines to finalize, press releases to review, and follow-up calls to make. Jennifer Walsh stopped by my office around 9:30. "How does it feel to be the woman who landed the biggest deal in company history?" she asked with a smile. "Pretty good," I admitted, "though I have a feeling the real work is just beginning." "Richard wants to see you at 10, right?" "Yeah, I'm assuming it's about the next steps. Maybe a promotion to senior vice president." Jennifer's expression shifted slightly, but before I could ask what was wrong, my phone rang. It was Blackwood's assistant, confirming our meeting. I spent the next 20 minutes reviewing my accomplishments over the past 5 years. The Henderson deal was the crown jewel, but I'd consistently delivered results that exceeded expectations. My client retention rate was the highest in the firm, and I'd brought in over $300 million in fees during my tenure. By any objective measure, I was exactly the kind of employee that Meridian should want to keep and promote. At exactly 10 o'clock, I knocked on Richard Blackwood's door. "Come in, Sarah. Please have a seat." His office was intimidating by design. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, walls lined with deal tombstones commemorating decades of successful transactions, and a desk that looked like it could seat a small board meeting. But I'd been in this room dozens of times before, and today I felt like I belonged here. First, let me say again how impressed we all are with the Henderson acquisition, Blackwood began. It's exactly the kind of transformational deal that establishes Meridian as a major player in the middle market. Thank you, sir. I'm excited to start working on the integration process. Blackwood's expression grew serious. Sarah, that's actually what I wanted to discuss with you. The partners have been talking, and we've decided to make some organizational changes in light of this new opportunity. Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. What kind of changes? We're promoting David Chen to Senior Vice President and putting him in charge of the Henderson account going forward. His experience with large-scale integrations makes him the logical choice to manage this relationship. David Chen. The man who'd spent the past 18 months questioning every aspect of my negotiation strategy. The man who'd argued that we should walk away from the Henderson deal 3 different times because it was too complicated. The man who'd contributed virtually nothing to the success we were celebrating. I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood, but I don't understand. This is my deal. I've spent 18 months building the relationship with Marcus Henderson. He specifically requested that I remain the primary contact moving forward. Sarah, you've done excellent work, and we want to make sure you're properly compensated for your contributions. We're prepared to offer you a retention bonus of $75,000, and we'd like you to take on a new role as Director of Business Development. The words hit me like a physical blow. Director of Business Development was essentially a junior position focused on lead generation and preliminary client meetings. And the salary that came with it was $95,000, a 65% cut from my current vice president compensation of $275,000, not counting bonuses. You're demoting me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We're restructuring the organization to better serve our clients' needs, Blackwood replied, his tone suggesting this was a perfectly reasonable business decision. Your skills are better suited to business development than account management. I sat in stunned silence for several seconds, trying to process what was happening. I'd just delivered the biggest success in the company's history, and they were responding by cutting my salary and removing me from the account I'd created. Mr. Blackwood, with all due respect, this doesn't make any sense. The Henderson Group specifically requested that I remain their primary contact. Taking me off this account could jeopardize the entire relationship. Sarah, I understand you're disappointed, but this decision has been made. David will do an excellent job managing the Henderson account, and we believe you'll find your new role both challenging and rewarding. The meeting continued for another 10 minutes, but I barely heard the rest of it. Something about leveraging my relationship-building skills and creating new opportunities for growth. All I could think about was the betrayal of it all. I'd worked 100-hour weeks, missed family events, sacrificed relationships, all for a company that was now tossing me aside at the moment of my greatest triumph. As I walked back to my office, I felt the eyes of my colleagues on me. Word had already started to spread through the office gossip network. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed uncomfortable, and a few appeared almost relieved that someone else was getting knocked down a peg. I closed my office door and sat at my desk, staring at the framed photo of Marcus Henderson and me shaking hands at the signing ceremony. Less than 24 hours ago, that handshake had represented the pinnacle of my career. Now it felt like evidence of everything I was losing. The phone rang. It was Marcus Henderson himself. Sarah. I just got off the phone with Richard Blackwood. He tells me that David Chen will be taking over as our primary contact going forward. I have to say, I'm not happy about this development. Mr. Henderson, I'm as surprised as you are. I only found out about it this morning. This is exactly the kind of corporate shuffle that I was worried about. You gave me your word that Meridian would honor our agreements, and the first thing they do is remove the person who negotiated those agreements. I could hear the anger in his voice, and I didn't blame him. From his perspective, this looked like a classic bait-and-switch operation. Promise one thing during negotiations, then change the terms once the contracts are signed. Mr. Henderson, I want you to know that I'll do everything I can to ensure a smooth transition. David is a capable executive and he'll take good care of your account. Sarah, with all due respect, I didn't spend 18 months getting to know David Chen. I built a relationship with you based on trust and mutual respect. If Meridian thinks they can just swap out personnel like spare parts, they're going to learn otherwise. After Henderson hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The late nights, the weekend calls, the months of careful relationship building. All of it was being handed over to someone who'd opposed the deal from the beginning. But more than that, I was thinking about what this said about my future at Meridian Capital. If they were willing to treat me this way after the biggest success of my career, what would happen the next time I hit a rough patch? How could I ever trust them to have my back when it mattered? By the end of the day, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to accept the demotion, the pay cut, or the humiliation of being pushed aside. I'd worked too hard and accomplished too much to let Richard Blackwood and his partners treat me like a disposable asset. But I also wasn't going to make the mistake of leaving in anger, burning bridges and damaging relationships that had taken years to build. If Meridian Capital thought they could discard me after I'd delivered unprecedented success, they were about to learn that some people don't go quietly. I was going to make them crawl back. The resignation letter sat on my desk for 3 days before I finally deleted it. Writing it had been therapeutic. 2 pages of carefully worded professional language that basically said, "Go to hell," in the most corporate way possible. But submitting it would have been emotional, and emotional decisions rarely lead to satisfying outcomes. Instead, I spent those 3 days doing what I did best: research and strategic planning. The first thing I discovered was that I wasn't the only one unhappy with recent developments at Meridian. Amanda Foster, one of our best junior analysts, had been passed over for promotion twice in the past year, despite bringing in 3 major clients. Kevin Walsh, no relation to Jennifer, had been reassigned to a dead-end role after questioning some questionable accounting practices in the real estate division. A pattern was emerging, and it wasn't pretty. But the most interesting discovery came from an unexpected source: my old business school friend, Rebecca Torres, who worked at Harrison & Associates, one of Meridian's biggest competitors. We met for drinks at a wine bar in Soho, ostensibly to catch up, but I had ulterior motives. "So I heard about your big coup with Henderson Group," Rebecca said, swirling her Pinot Grigio. "That's the kind of deal that makes careers. Or breaks them." "Apparently," I replied, taking a sip of my own wine. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Trouble in paradise?" I gave her the abbreviated version of my demotion, watching her expression grow more incredulous with each detail. By the time I finished, she was shaking her head in disbelief. "Sarah, that's insane. You just delivered the deal of the decade, and they're cutting your salary by 65%? Apparently, my skills are better suited to business development than account management. That's corporate speak for 'we want to steal your credit and minimize your influence.'" Rebecca leaned forward. "You know what this sounds like to me? It sounds like Richard Blackwood is positioning David Chen as his successor, and he needed a big win to justify the promotion." The pieces clicked into place. Blackwood was 62 years old, and there had been whispers about his retirement timeline for the past year. David Chen was his protege, the golden boy who'd been fast-tracked through the ranks despite a mediocre track record. The Henderson deal wasn't just about the money. It was about establishing David's credentials for the top job. "What are you going to do?" Rebecca asked. "I'm still figuring that out. But I'm not going to just accept this and move on." "Good. Because you know what? Harrison would kill to have someone with your track record. We've been trying to break into the middle market for years, and you just proved it's possible." I filed that information away for later. Rebecca's offer was tempting, but jumping to a competitor would be seen as a lateral move at best. I needed something bigger, something that would make Meridian regret their decision in a very public way. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in 5 years at Meridian. I called in sick. Instead of going to the office, I took the subway to the New York Public Library and spent the day researching everything I could find about corporate acquisitions, executive compensation, and, most importantly, client retention in the investment banking industry. What I learned was fascinating. The financial services industry has one of the highest client turnover rates of any professional sector, with the average client relationship lasting less than 7 years. But there are exceptions. Relationships that last decades, built on personal trust rather than institutional loyalty. And when those relationships end, they usually take their business with them. Marcus Henderson was exactly that type of client. He'd been burned by investment banks before, which was why he'd remained independent for so long. His decision to work with Meridian was based entirely on his relationship with me, not on the firm's reputation or capabilities. By the end of the day, I had the beginnings of a plan. It was audacious, potentially career-ending if it backfired, but it was also the kind of move that could change everything. The next few weeks were a masterclass in strategic patience. I showed up to work every day, accepted my new role with grace, and began the process of transitioning the Henderson account to David Chen. On the surface, I was being the perfect team player. But beneath that facade, I was methodically documenting every aspect of the Henderson relationship. David Chen was everything I'd expected and worse. He approached the Henderson account like a checklist, focusing on quarterly metrics and cost optimization rather than the relationship building that had made the deal possible in the first place. His first call with Marcus Henderson lasted exactly 15 minutes, a perfunctory check-in that covered nothing of substance. "How did it go?" I asked afterward, genuinely curious. "Fine," David replied dismissively. "Henderson seems like a straightforward client. I don't see why everyone made such a big deal about managing this relationship." I smiled and nodded, but inside I was taking notes. David had no idea what he'd just inherited, and his arrogance was going to be his downfall. The real breakthrough came during a casual conversation with Jennifer Walsh. We were grabbing coffee in the break room when she mentioned that she'd been fielding calls from headhunters all week. "It's crazy," she said. "Ever since news of the Henderson deal broke, I've been getting 2 or 3 calls a day from other firms trying to poach our talent." "Anyone interesting?" "Actually, yes. There's this boutique firm in Boston, Whitmore and Associates, that's been particularly aggressive. They're looking to expand into the middle market, and they've got serious backing." I'd heard of Whitmore and Associates. They were a small but prestigious firm that specialized in high-end client service. Their founder, Patricia Whitmore, was a legend in the industry, a former Goldman Sachs managing director who'd left to start her own firm 15 years ago. They only took on a handful of clients, but they treated each one like royalty. That evening, I did some research on Whitmore and Associates. What I found was impressive. They had a client retention rate of over 90%, the highest in the industry. Their average deal size was smaller than the major firms, but their clients were intensely loyal. And according to their website, they were actively looking to expand their team. I spent the weekend crafting the perfect approach. Instead of sending a traditional resume and cover letter, I prepared a comprehensive market analysis of the middle market acquisition space, complete with case studies and projected growth opportunities. It was the kind of document that demonstrated not just my experience, but my strategic thinking. On Monday morning, I called Patricia Whitmore's office directly. "Ms. Whitmore's office, this is Catherine speaking." "Hi, Catherine. This is Sarah Martinez from Meridian Capital. I have a proposal that I think Ms. Whitmore would find interesting, and I was hoping to schedule a few minutes of her time." "What kind of proposal?" "It's regarding an opportunity in the middle market acquisition space. I've prepared some analysis that might be relevant to your expansion plans." There was a pause. "Can you hold for a moment?" 2 minutes later, Patricia Whitmore herself was on the line. "Ms. Martinez, Catherine tells me you have a proposal for me. I have to say, I'm intrigued. Your work on the Henderson deal has been getting a lot of attention in our circles." "Thank you, Ms. Whitmore. I'd love the opportunity to discuss some ideas I have about the middle market space. Would it be possible to meet sometime this week? How about Thursday at 2 o'clock? My office is in Boston, but I'll be in New York for meetings. That would be perfect. We met at her hotel in Midtown, and I could tell within the first 5 minutes that Patricia Whitmore was exactly the kind of person I wanted to work with. She was brilliant, direct, and had no patience for corporate politics. When I explained my situation at Meridian, her response was immediate. They demoted you after the Henderson deal? That's not just stupid, it's insulting. I thought so too. Sarah, let me be direct with you. I've been watching your career for the past 2 years, and I've been impressed by your work. When the Henderson deal closed, I actually told my partners that you were exactly the kind of person we should be trying to recruit. I'm listening. Here's what I'm thinking. Whitmore and Associates has been looking to expand into the middle market, but we've been missing the right person to lead that initiative. You have the experience, the track record, and most importantly, the relationships. She slid a folder across the table. This is a preliminary offer. Senior Vice President with a path to partnership within 3 years. Base salary of $400,000 plus equity participation and performance bonuses. I opened the folder and tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was doing backflips. The base salary alone was almost 50% more than I'd been making at Meridian, and the equity participation could be worth millions if the firm continued to grow. This is generous, Ms. Whitmore. Call me Patricia. And it's not generous. It's strategic. I believe you can help us build something special here. I'm very interested, but I need to think about the timing. I have some obligations at Meridian that I'd like to handle properly. Patricia smiled. I respect that. But Sarah, let me give you some advice. Loyalty is admirable, but it has to be mutual. From what you've told me, Meridian has already shown you exactly how much they value your contributions. We talked for another hour about the vision for Whitmore's middle market practice, and I could feel my excitement building. This wasn't just a job opportunity. It was a chance to build something from the ground up, with the backing of one of the most respected names in the industry. But as attractive as the offer was, I still had unfinished business at Meridian. The Henderson account was imploding under David Chen's management, and I wanted to be there to see the fallout. It didn't take long. 2 weeks after my meeting with Patricia, Marcus Henderson called my direct line at Meridian. Sarah, I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, Mr. Henderson. What's on your mind? Is David Chen always this— He paused, searching for the right word. Transactional? I chose my words carefully. David has a different management style than I do. He's very focused on metrics and efficiency. That's one way to put it. Sarah, I've been in business for 50 years, and I've worked with a lot of different people. But I've never had someone suggest that I should consider optimizing my workforce. 3 weeks after signing an acquisition agreement, my heart sank. David had actually suggested layoffs to Marcus Henderson, the man who'd built his entire reputation on taking care of his employees. Mr. Henderson, I'm sure David was just exploring all options for maximizing synergies. Synergies? Marcus's voice was cold. That's exactly the kind of corporate doublespeak that made me avoid investment banks for 30 years. Sarah, I need you to be straight with me. Is this the kind of partnership I can expect from Meridian going forward? I took a deep breath. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. But now that it was here, I felt the weight of responsibility. What I said next would affect not just my own career, but the livelihoods of thousands of Henderson Group employees. Mr. Henderson, I think, you should know that I'm no longer in a position to influence the management of your account. I've been reassigned to a different role within the firm. What do you mean, reassigned? I mean that despite delivering the Henderson acquisition, Meridian has decided that my skills are better suited to business development than account management. David Chen is now your primary contact, and he reports directly to Richard Blackwood. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Sarah, are you telling me that the woman who spent 18 months earning my trust and negotiating this deal is no longer involved in managing the relationship? That's correct. And they made this decision after you successfully closed the largest acquisition in their company's history. Yes, sir. Another long pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was different, harder, more decisive. Sarah, I want you to know that I consider you to be one of the most honorable people I've ever worked with in business. What Meridian has done to you is not just wrong, it's stupid, and I don't do business with stupid people. Mr. Henderson, I hope you'll give David a chance to prove himself. The integration process is complex, but with the right approach. Sarah, stop. I've made my decision. I'm terminating the agreement with Meridian Capital. The words hit me like a physical blow. Mr. Henderson, please don't make any hasty decisions. This affects thousands of jobs, not just my career. I'm not being hasty. I'm being strategic. The Henderson Group has 90 days to withdraw from this agreement under the terms we negotiated. I'm exercising that option. But the integration process has already begun. The legal costs alone will be worth every penny if it means I don't have to deal with David Chen for the next 10 years. Marcus's voice softened slightly. Sarah, I want you to know that this isn't your fault. You did everything right. But I'm not going to let Meridian Capital treat you like a disposable asset and then expect me to pretend everything is fine. After Marcus hung up, I sat at my desk staring at the phone. The Henderson Group was pulling out of the biggest deal in Meridian's history, and it was happening because of how they'd treated me. In less than a month, I'd gone from being the architect of the firm's greatest triumph to being the catalyst for its biggest disaster. I should have felt guilty, but instead I felt something else entirely: vindication. The next morning, I called Patricia Whitmore. Patricia, it's Sarah Martinez. I'd like to discuss that offer we talked about. Excellent. When can you start? I'll need to give Meridian 2 weeks' notice, but there's something you should know. The Henderson Group is withdrawing from their acquisition agreement. They'll be looking for new representation. There was a pause. Sarah, are you telling me that Marcus Henderson is terminating a $1.8 billion deal? That's exactly what I'm telling you. And you think he might be interested in working with Whitmore and Associates? I think he's interested in working with people who understand the value of loyalty and partnership. Whether that's Whitmore and Associates depends on how you approach him. Patricia laughed. Sarah, I think you and I are going to work very well together. When can you start? As I hung up the phone, I realized that everything was about to change. Meridian Capital was about to lose the biggest client in their history, and I was about to land the biggest client in Whitmore and Associates' history. Richard Blackwood and David Chen thought they could push me aside and take credit for my work. They were about to learn that some people don't just get mad, they get even. The game was just beginning, and I was finally ready to play by my own rules. The email arrived at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, and I knew before opening it that everything was about to explode. All hands meeting at 9 a.m. Mandatory attendance. R. Blackwood. I was already at my desk in the Whitmore and Associates office in Boston, going through market reports with my first cup of coffee. My official start date wasn't for another week, but Patricia had given me temporary access to begin transitioning my contacts and preparing for the Henderson Group presentation. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walsh. Emergency at Meridian. Henderson pulled out. Blackwood is having a meltdown. Heard you might know something about this? I smiled and typed back. Hope everything works out. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared. Jennifer was smart enough to read between the lines. What Jennifer didn't know was that I'd spent the previous evening in Detroit, sitting in Marcus Henderson's office for the second time in my career. But this time, the conversation was very different. "Sarah, I want you to understand something," Marcus had said, leaning back in his leather chair. "When I built this company, I made a promise to myself that I would never work with people who didn't share my values. Meridian Capital violated that trust the moment they pushed you aside. Mr. Henderson, I appreciate your loyalty, but I want to make sure you're making this decision for the right reasons. The legal implications of withdrawing from the agreement are my problem to solve, not yours." He'd opened a folder on his desk. "I've already spoken with my attorneys. The 90-day withdrawal clause you negotiated gives us a clean exit. Meridian will keep their initial fees, but they won't see another penny. That withdrawal clause had been my idea during the original negotiations. I'd insisted on it as protection for Henderson Group, arguing that this complex needed an escape hatch if things went wrong during the integration phase. Richard Blackwood had fought against it, but Marcus had refused to sign without it. Now that same clause was about to cost Meridian Capital over $50 million in projected fees. Mr. Henderson, if you're serious about moving forward with the acquisition, I should tell you that I've accepted a position with Whitmore and Associates. They're a smaller firm, but they specialize in exactly the kind of partnership you're looking for." Marcus had smiled for the first time during our conversation. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've done some research on Patricia Whitmore. Her reputation is impeccable. She's excited about the possibility of working with Henderson Group. But I want to be completely transparent. This would be a career-defining opportunity for me personally. Sarah, let me tell you something. In 50 years of business, I've learned that the best deals are the ones where everybody wins. Meridian wanted to use my company as a trophy. Whitmore wants to build a partnership. That's the difference between a transaction and a relationship. By the time I left Detroit that night, we had the framework for a new deal that would be even better than the original Meridian arrangement. Whitmore and Associates would structure the acquisition as a joint venture rather than a buyout, giving Henderson Group more operational independence while still achieving Marcus's legacy goals. But sitting in my temporary office in Boston, watching the chaos unfold at my former firm through a steady stream of text messages and phone calls, I realized this was bigger than just one client relationship. Amanda Foster called at 10:15 a.m. "Sarah, what the hell did you do?" "Good morning to you too, Amanda. Blackwood just announced that Henderson Group is withdrawing from the acquisition. He's blaming external factors beyond our control, but everyone knows something else is going on. Maybe David Chen's management style wasn't as effective as everyone thought." "Cut the crap, Sarah. I know you better than that. This has your fingerprints all over it." Amanda was right, of course. But I wasn't about to admit anything over the phone. "Amanda, I'm at my new job. Whatever's happening at Meridian isn't my problem anymore." "Your new job? Where are you working?" "Whitmore and Associates in Boston. I start officially next week." There was a long pause. "Sarah, you need to know something. Blackwood is telling people that you sabotaged the Henderson deal out of spite. He's saying you violated your fiduciary duty to the firm." My blood ran cold. Accusing me of sabotage was one thing, but questioning my professional ethics was a direct attack on my reputation. In the investment banking world, integrity was everything. If Blackwood's version of events gained traction, it could destroy my career at any firm. "That's ridiculous, Amanda. I transitioned the account professionally and completely. If David Chen couldn't maintain the relationship, that's not my fault." "I know that, and anyone who worked with you knows that. But Blackwood is looking for a scapegoat, and you're not here to defend yourself." After Amanda hung up, I sat at my desk thinking about the implications. I'd expected Meridian to be angry about losing Henderson Group, but I hadn't anticipated a character assassination campaign. Blackwood was playing dirty, and I needed to be prepared to fight back. Patricia Whitmore knocked on my office door frame. "How are you settling in?" "There's been a development with my former employer that I need to discuss with you." I gave her the full rundown: Henderson's withdrawal, Blackwood's accusations, and the potential reputation risk to Whitmore and Associates for hiring me. Patricia listened without interrupting, then leaned back in her chair. Sarah, let me ask you something. Did you violate any agreements or legal obligations in your dealings with Henderson Group? Absolutely not. I documented every interaction and followed all protocols for account transitions. Did you encourage Henderson to withdraw from the Meridian deal? I answered his questions honestly about my situation at the firm. I never advised him on his business decisions. Then Richard Blackwood can go to hell. Patricia's voice was matter of fact. If he wants to make this about your character, we'll make it about the facts. And the facts are that Meridian Capital mistreated their most successful dealmaker and lost their biggest client as a result. But if this becomes a public relations battle, Sarah, you're thinking too small. This isn't about public relations. This is about demonstrating to the entire industry what happens when firms prioritize politics over performance. Patricia was right. Instead of playing defense, I needed to go on offense. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. That afternoon, I received a call from Jessica Romano, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who covered the investment banking industry. Ms. Martinez, I'm working on a story about the Henderson Group acquisition and its sudden termination. I was hoping to get your perspective on what happened. I'd dealt with Jessica before during the original Henderson negotiations. She was thorough, fair, and had a reputation for getting the story right. Jessica, I'd be happy to talk, but I need to be careful about confidentiality agreements. Of course, I'm more interested in the broader industry implications. This is one of the largest deal withdrawals in recent memory, and there seems to be some dispute about the circumstances. We talked for 30 minutes. I stuck to facts that were already public or easily verifiable: my role in the original deal, my subsequent demotion, and the timeline of Henderson's withdrawal. I didn't speculate about motivations or assign blame, but I didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. One last question, Jessica said. Richard Blackwood suggests that you may have acted inappropriately in your communications with Henderson Group after your role change. How do you respond to that? I'd respond by pointing out that Marcus Henderson is one of the most sophisticated business leaders in the country. He doesn't make billion-dollar decisions based on anyone else's personal grievances. If he withdrew from the Meridian deal, it was because he believed it was in his company's best interests. The article ran 3 days later, and it was everything I could have hoped for. Jessica had done her homework, interviewing multiple sources, and painting a clear picture of what had really happened. The headline read, "When Loyalty Flows Upward, How Meridian Capital Lost a $1.8 billion Deal." The article didn't take sides explicitly, but the narrative was damning for Meridian. It detailed my track record, the Henderson deal's complexity, and the timeline of events leading to the withdrawal. Most importantly, it included a quote from Marcus Henderson himself. Sarah Martinez is one of the most professional and ethical people I've worked with in 50 years of business. Any suggestion that she acted inappropriately is not only false, but insulting to everyone involved in this process. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone didn't stop ringing for 3 days. Headhunters, former clients, industry contacts, and journalists all wanted to talk. The story had struck a nerve, highlighting issues that went far beyond my individual situation. But the most satisfying call came from an unexpected source: Kevin Walsh, the Meridian analyst who'd been sidelined after questioning the firm's practices. Sarah, I just wanted to thank you for what you've done. After the journal article came out, 3 other people have come forward with similar stories about how they were treated at Meridian. There's talk of a broader investigation into the firm's management practices. Kevin, I never intended for this to become about Meridian's culture. I just wanted to set the record straight about my own situation. Sometimes setting the record straight is exactly what an industry needs. You've given a voice to a lot of people who were afraid to speak up. The ripple effects continued for weeks. Two more senior executives left Meridian, citing philosophical differences with management. Three major clients requested meetings to discuss their relationships with the firm. And most importantly for me, Whitmore and Associates was suddenly the most talked about boutique firm on Wall Street. Patricia Whitmore was loving every minute of it. "Sarah, I've been in this business for 30 years and I've never seen anything like this," she said during our weekly strategy meeting. "We've had more inbound inquiries in the past month than we typically get in a year. It's been overwhelming, but I think we're positioned to really capitalize on this momentum." Speaking of which, I have some news. Marcus Henderson called this morning. He's ready to move forward with the new acquisition structure we discussed, but he has one condition. What's that? He wants you to lead the integration process personally, not just as the relationship manager, but as the executive, in charge of the entire operation. I felt a surge of excitement mixed with nervous energy. Leading the Henderson integration would be the biggest challenge of my career, but it was also exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been working toward my entire professional life. "Patricia, that's incredibly generous, but are you sure the firm is ready for that kind of responsibility shift? I've only been here officially for 2 weeks." "Sarah, let me be clear about something. When I recruited you, it wasn't just because of your technical skills or your track record. It was because I recognized that you're the kind of person who can build something lasting. The Henderson integration isn't just about one deal. It's about establishing Whitmore and Associates as a major player in the middle market. I won't let you down. I know you won't. But there's something else you should know. Richard Blackwood called yesterday. My stomach dropped. What did he want? He wanted to discuss a potential partnership between Meridian and Whitmore on future deals. He seemed particularly interested in any projects involving Henderson Group. I couldn't help but laugh. He actually thinks we'd work with them after everything that's happened? That's exactly what I told him. But Sarah, I think you should know what his real message was. He's scared. Meridian is hemorrhaging clients and talent, and he's starting to realize that losing you was the biggest mistake of his career. What did you tell him? I told him that if he wanted to discuss partnerships, he should probably start by apologizing to the best deal maker his firm ever had. Then I hung up. As I walked back to my office, I thought about how much had changed in just 2 months. I'd gone from being demoted and dismissed to being offered equity partnership at one of the most prestigious boutique firms in the industry. Marcus Henderson, who could have worked with any investment bank in the world, had chosen to follow me to Whitmore and Associates. But more than that, I'd proven something important to myself. I didn't need Meridian Capital's approval or validation to be successful. I'd built my career on relationships, integrity, and results, and those qualities were portable. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Sarah, this is David Chen. We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. David Chen had had his chance to talk when he was taking credit for my work. Now that the consequences were becoming clear, he wanted to negotiate. But I was done negotiating with people who didn't respect what I brought to the table. The real satisfaction wasn't in watching Meridian struggle, it was in building something better. And that's exactly what I intended to do. Tomorrow, Marcus Henderson would be flying to Boston to finalize the new acquisition structure. In 3 months, Henderson Group would complete the largest joint venture in Whitmore and Associates history. And in 6 months, I'd be the youngest partner in the firm's 15-year existence. Richard Blackwood had wanted to teach me a lesson about knowing my place. Instead, he'd taught me something much more valuable. Sometimes the best response to being pushed aside is to build something so successful that the people who dismissed you have no choice but to take notice. The game wasn't over yet, but the score was starting to look very different than anyone at Meridian had expected. The Henderson Group integration was supposed to take 18 months. We completed it in 11. Standing in the conference room at Whitmore and Associates 6 months after leaving Meridian, I watched Marcus Henderson sign the final documentation that would make our joint venture official. The deal was structured as a $2.1 billion partnership, $300 million more than the original Meridian agreement, with Henderson Group maintaining operational independence while gaining access to Whitmore's capital markets expertise. Sarah, I have to say, this process has been everything I hoped it would be when we first started talking 2 years ago, Marcus said, setting down his pen. You've delivered on every promise. Patricia Whitmore beamed from across the table. Chai-dee. The 6 months since I'd joined the firm, our middle market practice had grown from a concept to a 15-person division. We'd closed 4 additional deals, hired 3 senior associates from competing firms, and established Whitmore and Associates as a legitimate player in the space. But the real measure of our success wasn't in the numbers. It was in the relationships. Every client we'd brought on had come through personal referrals, and our retention rate remained at 100%. The credit belongs to the entire team, I replied. This kind of integration requires coordination across multiple disciplines. Speaking of teams, Marcus said, I had an interesting conversation yesterday that I thought you should know about. Raised an eyebrow. Oh? Richard Blackwood called me directly. He wanted to discuss the possibility of Meridian participating in some of our future financing needs. The room fell silent. Patricia's expression hardened, and I felt my own jaw tighten. After everything that had happened, Blackwood was still trying to insert himself into the Henderson relationship. What did you tell him? Patricia asked. I told him that Henderson Group has found a partner that understands our values and priorities. We're not interested in working with firms that treat their best people as disposable assets. How did he respond to that? Marcus chuckled. He offered to make it worth my while. Suggested that Meridian could offer more competitive terms than a boutique firm like Whitmore. The man has no shame, Patricia muttered. Actually, I found it quite illuminating, Marcus continued. It told me everything I needed to know about his character. A leader who's willing to undermine his former employee to win back business isn't someone I want to work with. After Marcus left, Patricia and I debriefed in her office. The success of the Henderson integration had exceeded everyone's expectations. But Blackwood's continued interference was becoming a problem. He's getting desperate, Patricia observed. 3 more senior people left Meridian last month, and their deal flow has dropped 30% year over year. I heard David Chen was reassigned again, I said. Apparently his client management skills weren't quite what Blackwood thought they were. Sarah, I want to discuss something with you. The partners met yesterday, and we've made a decision about your future here. My heart skipped a beat. Despite all our success, I'd been at Whitmore for less than a year. Partnership discussions usually took place after at least 3 years of proven performance. We'd like to offer you a full equity partnership, effective immediately. 20% stake, with the option to increase to 25% within 2 years based on performance metrics. I stared at her in shock. A 20% stake in Whitmore and Associates was worth millions. But more than that, it represented something I'd never thought possible at my age. A true ownership position in a prestigious firm. Patricia, I don't know what to say. This is incredibly generous. It's not generous, it's strategic. You've brought in 40% of our revenue this year, and more importantly, you've helped us establish a reputation that's attracting talent and clients from across the industry. What's the timeline for making this official? We'd like to announce it next month, coinciding with the Henderson Group integration announcement. The market impact should be significant. That night, I celebrated alone in my Boston apartment with a bottle of champagne that cost more than my first month's rent out of college. I thought about calling my mother, but it was late, and I wanted to savor the moment privately first. Partnership at Whitmore and Associates represented everything I'd worked toward since graduating from business school. But more than that, it was validation that my decision to leave Meridian had been the right one. I'd bet my career on the belief that talent and integrity would be rewarded, and I'd been proven right. The announcement went public on a Tuesday morning, and the response was immediate. The Wall Street Journal ran a follow-up story about my partnership, framing it as a cautionary tale about how firms lose talent when they prioritize politics over performance. Bloomberg covered it as a success story about boutique firms competing with major players. And Industry Week featured it in a broader piece about the changing dynamics of the investment banking sector. But the call that surprised me most came from Jennifer Walsh. "Sarah, congratulations on the partnership. I saw the announcement this morning." "Thank you, Jennifer. How are things at Meridian?" "Honestly, it's been a difficult year. We've lost several major clients, and the atmosphere here is tense." "I'm sorry to hear that. I know how much the firm means to you." "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. Are you hiring?" I nearly dropped my phone. Jennifer Walsh had been at Meridian for 12 years and was one of their most respected executives. If she was considering leaving, the situation there must be worse than I'd realized. "Jennifer, you know I'd love to work with you again. But are you sure about this? Leaving Meridian would be a big change." "I've been thinking about it for months. The culture here has become toxic since you left. Blackwood is paranoid about client defections, and he's micromanaging everything. It's not the firm I joined 12 years ago." "When would you want to talk about it seriously?" "How about dinner tomorrow night? I'll be in Boston for a client meeting." We met at a restaurant in Back Bay, and I could see the stress in Jennifer's face immediately. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond normal work fatigue. "Sarah, I need to tell you something that you're not going to like," she began after we'd ordered. "Blackwood has been actively trying to undermine your reputation in industry circles." "What do you mean?" "He's been telling people that you stole the Henderson Group client through unethical means. He's claiming that you violated confidentiality agreements and used proprietary information to benefit your new firm." I felt my anger rising, but I kept my voice level. "That's completely false, and he knows it." "Of course it's false. But he's not making these accusations publicly. He's spreading them through back-channel conversations with other firm leaders. The goal is to damage your credibility without giving you a chance to respond." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it's wrong, and because I'm tired of working for someone who operates that way." "Sarah, you're the most ethical person I've ever worked with. What Blackwood is doing isn't just unfair to you. It's damaging to the entire industry." I spent the rest of dinner learning about the extent of Meridian's problems: client defections, talent hemorrhaging, and a toxic culture that was driving away their best people. But more importantly, I learned that Jennifer wasn't the only senior executive considering leaving. "Amanda Foster has been interviewing at other firms," Jennifer told me. "Kevin Walsh is exploring opportunities with boutique firms. Even some of the junior analysts are looking elsewhere." "That's an exodus, not normal turnover?" "Exactly. And Blackwood's response has been to tighten control rather than address the underlying problems. He's convinced that if he can just discredit you publicly, it will solve all his retention issues." The next morning, I called Patricia to discuss the Jennifer Walsh opportunity and the broader intelligence about Meridian's reputation campaign. "Sarah, this is exactly what we've been waiting for," Patricia said. "If we can bring Jennifer on board, along with some of the other talent that's looking to leave Meridian, we can establish ourselves as the clear alternative for professionals who value integrity over politics." "But what about Blackwood's reputation attacks? Let him keep talking. The more he focuses on you, the less attention he's paying to fixing his own problems. Besides, results speak louder than rumors. 6 months from now, when we've doubled our client base and he's still hemorrhaging talent, the market will know who's telling the truth." Jennifer Walsh joined Whitmore and Associates 6 weeks later as Managing Director of Client Relations. Amanda Foster followed 2 weeks after that as Senior Vice President of Business Development. By the end of the year, we'd hired 5 former Meridian employees, including 2 vice presidents and 3 senior analysts. Each hire sent shockwaves through the industry. It wasn't just about the talent acquisition. It was about what the defections said about the relative health of the two firms. Whitmore was growing, attracting top talent, and winning clients. Meridian was contracting, losing people, and struggling to maintain relationships. The tipping point came during the annual investment banking conference in Chicago. I was giving a keynote presentation about middle market strategies when I spotted Richard Blackwood in the audience. He looked older than I remembered, and there was something desperate in his expression. After my presentation, he approached me during the networking reception. "Sarah, congratulations on your success at Whitmore. You've built something impressive." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. I appreciate that. I was wondering if we might have a private conversation. Perhaps we could find a quiet corner somewhere?" I glanced around the crowded reception hall, then nodded toward a less populated area near the windows. "Sarah, I want to be direct with you," he began once we were out of earshot. "Meridian made a mistake in how we handled your situation last year. I take full responsibility for that." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "The truth is, we underestimated your value to the firm and to our clients. The Henderson Group situation was a wake-up call that we should have handled differently." "Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate the acknowledgement, but I'm not sure what you're hoping to accomplish with this conversation." "I'm hoping to accomplish a reconciliation." "Sarah, Meridian needs someone with your skills and client relationships. We'd like to explore the possibility of bringing you back in a senior leadership role." I almost laughed out loud. After everything that had happened, the demotion, the character assassination, the attempts to undermine my new firm, Richard Blackwood was trying to poach me back. "What kind of role are you talking about?" "Senior Managing Director, with a clear path to the executive committee. Full equity participation, and you'd have complete autonomy over the middle market division." "And what would happen to David Chen in this scenario?" Blackwood's expression darkened slightly. "David's role would be restructured to focus on his core competencies." Translation: David would be demoted or pushed out, just as I had been. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm flattered by the offer, but I'm very happy at Whitmore & Associates. We're building something special there." "Sarah, be realistic. Whitmore is a boutique firm with limited resources. Meridian can offer you opportunities that no small firm can match. Like the opportunity to be demoted after delivering the biggest deal in company history?" Blackwood flinched. "That was a different situation, under different circumstances." "The circumstances were that you wanted to promote David Chen and needed a big win to justify it. My success was inconvenient for your political agenda." "Sarah, I'm trying to make things right here. Mr. Blackwood, let me be clear about something. I don't need you to make things right. I've already made them right myself. Whitmore & Associates is exactly where I want to be, working with people who understand the value of loyalty and integrity. Think about what you're giving up. Meridian has resources, prestige, global reach, and a 30% decline in client retention since I left," I finished. "Mr. Blackwood, I know exactly what I'm giving up, and I know exactly what I've gained. The math works in my favor." I turned to walk away, then stopped and looked back. "But I do want to thank you for something. Demoting me was the best thing that ever happened to my career. It forced me to realize that I was capable of more than just being a good employee. I could be a leader, a partner, an owner. So thank you for that lesson." As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. For months, I'd been angry about how Meridian had treated me. But standing there, looking at Richard Blackwood's desperate expression, I realized that my anger had transformed into something more powerful: indifference. I didn't need Richard Blackwood's approval anymore. I didn't need Meridian's validation. I had built something better, and I had done it by staying true to the values that had made me successful in the first place. The tables hadn't just turned, they had been completely rebuilt. 18 months after Richard Blackwood's desperate pitch at the Chicago conference, I received an envelope with no return address delivered to my corner office at Whitmore & Associates. Inside was a single document, Meridian Capital's bankruptcy filing. I set the papers down on my mahogany desk and stared out the window at Boston Harbor. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 years ago, I'd been sitting in a smaller office, watching my career implode after delivering the biggest success of my professional life. Now, I was a managing partner at one of the most successful boutique investment firms in the country, and my former employer had ceased to exist. But the real story wasn't about Meridian's collapse. It was about what we'd built in its place. Patricia. Whitmore knocked on my door frame, holding a bottle of champagne and wearing the biggest smile I'd seen from her in months. "I assume you've heard the news?" she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Hard to miss. The Wall Street Journal called it the end of an era in traditional investment banking. "Sarah, do you realize what this means? In less than 2 years, we've gone from a regional boutique to the primary alternative for middle-market clients leaving the major firms. We're not just successful, we're revolutionary." She was right. Whitmore and Associates had grown from 12 employees to 47. Our assets under management had increased by 400%, and we'd completed over 30 major transactions. But more importantly, we'd proven that a different model could work in investment banking, one based on long-term relationships rather than short-term profits. "The truly amazing part," Patricia continued, "is that most of our growth has come from client referrals. We haven't had to chase business or compete on price. People are coming to us because they want to work with a firm that operates differently." My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Henderson. "Saw the news about Meridian. Thank you for showing me what real partnership looks like. Looking forward to announcing our next project together." The next project Marcus was referring to was something that would have been impossible during my Meridian days. Henderson Group was acquiring 3 smaller manufacturing companies across the Midwest, and they'd asked Whitmore and Associates to structure the entire deal as a series of joint ventures. The total value would exceed $800 million, making it one of the largest transactions in our firm's history. But the Henderson expansion was just one of several major initiatives we had in development. Amanda Foster had brought in 2 pharmaceutical companies looking to merge their research divisions. Jennifer Walsh was working with a family-owned retail chain that wanted to expand nationally without losing their local identity. And Kevin Walsh, who'd finally escaped Meridian 6 months after I did, was leading our new technology practice. The transformation went beyond just the numbers. We'd created something that I'd never experienced in traditional investment banking, a workplace where people actually enjoyed coming to work. "Patricia, I've been thinking about something," I said, pouring 2 glasses of champagne. "Remember when you first recruited me and you said that loyalty has to be mutual?" "Of course. I think that principle is why we've been so successful. We don't just tell clients what they want to hear. We tell them what they need to know. We don't just deliver transactions. We build relationships that last decades. And we don't just hire talent. We develop partners," Patricia added. "Speaking of which, I have some news that I think you'll find interesting." She pulled out a folder from her briefcase. "I've been talking with the other founding partners about our expansion plans. We want to open offices in Chicago and Atlanta, and we'd like you to lead the effort." I opened the folder and saw preliminary plans for a national expansion that would position Whitmore and Associates as a true competitor to the major Wall Street firms. The Chicago office would focus on manufacturing and industrial clients, while Atlanta would target healthcare and technology companies in the Southeast. "This is ambitious," I said, scanning through the financial projections. "We're talking about doubling our headcount and tripling our office space." "It's ambitious, but it's also necessary. The demand is there, Sarah. We're turning away qualified clients because we don't have the capacity to serve them properly." "What's the timeline?" 18 months for full operation in both cities. But here's the interesting part. We've already had preliminary conversations with several former Meridian clients who are interested in working with us once we have a presence in their markets. I laughed, shaking my head. Even after Meridian's gone, we're still benefiting from their mistakes. Actually, that's not entirely accurate anymore, Patricia said with a mysterious smile. We've started benefiting from our own successes. Before, I could ask what she meant. My assistant knocked on the door. Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have a call from Daniel Morrison at Morrison Industries. He says it's urgent. Daniel Morrison was the CEO of one of the largest privately held companies in Texas. Morrison Industries owned everything from oil refineries to real estate developments, and Daniel had a reputation for being both brilliant and demanding. More importantly, his company had never worked with external investment banks. They'd always handled their financing and acquisitions internally. Mr. Morrison, what can I do for you? Ms. Martinez, I'll get straight to the point. Morrison Industries is considering our first major acquisition in 15 years, and we'd like Whitmore and Associates to handle the transaction. I grabbed a pen and paper. What kind of acquisition are we talking about? Energy infrastructure? Specifically, we're looking at acquiring Thompson Power Systems and their subsidiary companies. The total value would be approximately $2.3 billion. I nearly dropped the phone. Thompson Power Systems was one of the largest independent power companies in the country, with operations in 12 states and annual revenues exceeding $800 million. An acquisition of that scale would be the largest transaction in Whitmore's history by a significant margin. Mr. Morrison, I'm honored that you'd consider us for a transaction of this magnitude, but I have to ask, why Whitmore? You could work with any major firm in the country. Because every major firm I've talked to has tried to convince me that I need them more than they need me. You're the first person who's asked why I want to work with you, rather than assuming. You deserve the business. I appreciate that, but this is a complex transaction that will require significant resources. Ms. Martinez, let me stop you right there. I've done my homework on your firm. I know about the Henderson Group integration, the pharmaceutical merger you handled last quarter, and the technology deals you've been closing. More importantly, I know about your reputation for delivering on promises. What's your timeline for moving forward? We'd like to start due diligence next month, with a target closing date of early next year. But Ms. Martinez, there's something else you should know. Thompson Power Systems is currently represented by Goldman Sachs. They're not going to make this easy. After Daniel hung up, I sat in my office trying to process what had just happened. In the span of 30 minutes, I'd learned about Meridian's bankruptcy and received an offer to handle the largest acquisition in our firm's history. The symmetry was almost too perfect to believe. Patricia was still in my office, and she'd been listening to my side of the conversation with growing excitement. Sarah, do you realize what this means? The Morrison acquisition would establish us as a legitimate competitor to the major firms. We wouldn't just be a boutique operation anymore, we'd be a national player. But it would also stretch our resources to the limit. A $2.3 billion transaction requires a level of support that we've never had to provide before. Then we'll build that support. Sarah, this is exactly the kind of opportunity we've been preparing for. The question isn't whether we can handle it. The question is whether we're ready to take the next step. She was right, of course. Whitmore and Associates had been successful precisely because we'd been willing to take calculated risks and deliver results that exceeded expectations. The Morrison acquisition would be our biggest risk yet, but it would also be our biggest opportunity. Over the next 6 weeks, I assembled a team of 12 people to work on the Morrison transaction. We hired 3 additional analysts, brought in 2 external consultants with energy sector expertise, and established a dedicated project office in our Boston headquarters. The due diligence process was unlike anything I'd experienced before. Thompson Power Systems had operations across multiple states, thousands of employees, and regulatory relationships with dozens of government agencies. Every aspect of their business had to be analyzed, verified, and valued. But the real challenge was competing with Goldman Sachs for Thompson's cooperation. They'd been representing the company for 3 years, and they weren't going to give up a $2.3 billion deal without a fight. The breakthrough came during a site visit to Thomson's headquarters. In Houston, I was meeting with their CFO, Catherine Reynolds, when she mentioned that Goldman had been pressuring them to accelerate their timeline. They keep telling us that market conditions are perfect right now, and we need to move quickly or risk missing our window, Catherine said. But honestly, that feels like sales pressure rather than strategic advice. What does your timeline look like from an operational perspective? I asked. We'd prefer to wait until after the first quarter of next year. We're in the middle of a major system upgrade, and completing that before a sale would significantly improve our valuation. Have you discussed this with Goldman? We've tried, but they keep pushing back. They say the market won't wait, and we need to prioritize speed over optimization. That conversation gave me the opening I needed. Instead of competing with Goldman on their terms, I focused on what Thomson Power Systems actually needed: a partner who would prioritize their interests over transaction timing. I spent the next week preparing a presentation that outlined why waiting until Q1 would benefit everyone involved. The system upgrade Catherine had mentioned would increase Thomson's operational efficiency by 15%, which would translate to a valuation increase of over $100 million. Goldman's rush to close was going to cost Thomson shareholders money. The presentation to Thomson's board was one of the most important meetings of my career. I walked into a conference room in Houston, knowing that 9 executives were about to decide between a prestigious Wall Street firm and a boutique operation they'd never worked with before. Ms. Martinez, Thomson's CEO began, we appreciate the analysis you've prepared, but I have to ask the obvious question. Goldman Sachs has the resources and experience to handle a transaction of this complexity. What makes you think Whitmore and Associates can deliver the same level of service? Mr. Thomson, you're absolutely right that Goldman has more resources than we do. But resources aren't the same thing as results. Let me ask you a question. Do you want the fastest transaction possible, or do you want the best transaction possible? I want both. Then you want a firm that's willing to tell you when waiting 3 months will make you $100 million. Goldman is pushing for immediate execution because they want to book their fees this quarter. We're recommending patience because we want to maximize your value. The room fell silent. I could see the board members exchanging glances, and I knew I'd made my point. Furthermore, I continued, I'd like you to consider what happens after the transaction closes. Goldman will move on to their next deal, but Whitmore and Associates will continue working with Morrison Industries on integration and optimization. We're not just facilitating a sale, we're building a partnership. 2 weeks later, Thomson Power Systems fired Goldman Sachs and hired Whitmore and Associates to represent them in the Morrison acquisition. The transaction took 4 months to complete, and it was everything I'd hoped it would be. Morrison Industries got Thomson Power Systems at a valuation that was $150 million higher than Goldman's original estimates. Thomson's shareholders received maximum value for their company, and Whitmore and Associates earned a transaction fee that was larger than our total revenue from the previous year. But the real victory wasn't financial, it was reputational. The Morrison-Thomson deal established Whitmore and Associates as a firm that could compete with anyone on the most complex transactions. Within 6 months, we'd received inquiries from companies that had never considered working with a boutique firm before. The press coverage was extensive and overwhelmingly positive. Forbes ran a feature story about our relationship-first approach to investment banking. The Harvard Business Review published a case study about how we'd outmaneuvered Goldman Sachs. And Fortune included me in their 40 under 40 list of young executives changing their industries. But the most satisfying moment came 6 months after the Morrison deal closed, when I received a handwritten note from Marcus Henderson. Sarah, I wanted you to know how proud I am of everything you've accomplished. When we first met, I knew you were special, but I never imagined you'd build something this extraordinary. You've proven that integrity and excellence aren't just compatible, they're inseparable. Thank you for showing an old businessman that there's still hope for the next generation. As I read Marcus's note, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. 2.5 years ago, I'd been sitting in Richard Blackwood's office, listening to him explain why my biggest success meant I deserved a 65% pay cut. Today, I was a managing partner at one of the fastest-growing investment firms in the country, with an equity stake worth more than I'd ever imagined possible. But more than the money or the recognition, I'd gained something even more valuable: the knowledge that I could build something meaningful on my own terms. Meridian Capital had tried to teach me that success meant accepting whatever scraps the powerful decided to throw my way. Instead, I'd learned that real success meant creating value for others while staying true to your own principles. Richard Blackwood had wanted me to crawl. Instead, I'd learned to fly. And now, as I looked out at Boston Harbor from my corner office, I knew that this was just the beginning. Whitmore and Associates was expanding nationally, our client list was growing, and we were proving every day that a different kind of investment banking was not only possible, but profitable. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Patricia. "Sarah, I just got off a call with the mayor's office. They want to discuss our financing proposal for the new convention center project." I smiled, reaching for my jacket. Let's go show them what real partnership looks like. As I walked toward the elevator, I thought about all the people who had doubted me along the way. The colleagues who had whispered that I was too ambitious, too young, too idealistic to succeed at the highest levels of finance. The executives who had tried to diminish my achievements and minimize my contributions. They had all been wrong about one fundamental thing. They thought success was about climbing someone else's ladder. I'd learned that real success was about building your own. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, ready for whatever came next. After all, when you've made the people who tried to destroy you crawl back for mercy, every new challenge feels like just another opportunity to prove them wrong again. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.